friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 231, which is a continuation of my conversation with Lynda Wake, who is a wife, a mom, or mum, as she would say it, and grandmother. She is also the author of two amazing devotional books, Heartbreakingly Beautiful and Waiting Well with Jesus, and she's the founder of the Be Blessings Ministry, which you'll hear more about today. Last week, Lynn shared the story of how her daughter Bethany was diagnosed with inoperable terminal brain cancer at the tender age of 15. Today, we get deeper into her story, including her advice for newly bereaved parents, what she's learned about the character of God, and how she's experienced His faithfulness over the past 13 years. We're also going to have our first ever giveaway, so be sure to listen in for that. We will pick up our conversation right where we left off last week. What advice would you give to a newly bereaved parent? Somebody who is right at the beginning of their grief journey, maybe just in the first few weeks or months.
Oh, this one touches a nerve because, as I said, with the loss of my brother, we saw some unhealthy grief in the family, and Bethany noticed that, and so she actually warned me. She said, "Mum, I don't want you to become like that, bitter,
Wow. Yeah.
and I don't want you to become." She named a few people in the family, and she said, "Don't lose your faith over this, Mum." Mummy, she called me. "Don't
Wow.
lose your faith over this, because I'll be with God and He'll be with you, and we'll be together again." Like, she just had this incredible eternal perspective on it. At that stage, was ready to go and be with the Lord. But after she said those things to me, we ended up having a 13-week. It was horrific at the end because,
Mm.
she went 41 days without food and 13 without water. Like, the death was so drawn out. That
Yeah.
was possibly the hardest part for me.
Oh, sure.
Just crying out to God to take her every day, and
Mhm.
He didn't, and it
Yeah.
kept going. So I think to a newly bereaved parent, my heart just grieves with you, for you, and that's just a little indication of God doing that with us too. God is
Yes.
grieving with us, and even though we feel alone, we're actually not alone. I know that now, but I didn't feel it at the time. So I would say, be very careful with your heart. Just don't make rash decisions and rash judgments and declarations that could hurt you and others. Be gentle with your soul.
Yes.
Take it moment by moment. Allow yourself to feel the feelings and surround yourself with people who build you up in faith rather than tear you down. There will be voices that will continually say, "This is unfair, this shouldn't have happened," and feeding an anger there that is not going to be helpful to keep building. I hope that helps, because I just know that first year is very raw. It's very raw, all the anniversaries, and somehow you can't get around that. It is a journey. It's the valley of the shadow of death, the Bible calls that.
That's right.
But God is with us in that valley of the shadow of death too. And so we need to fear no evil, for God is with us.
That's right. That's great advice. Thank you for that. I think all of us that have lost a child have this very sharp dividing line in our lives of the before and the after. Talk about the before, Lynn, and the after, Lynn.
Well, the before Lynn seemed to have, what her heart's desire was to have, a happy marriage and 4 lovely children
Yeah,
and involved with Christian ministry. And while we'd gone through the loss of my brother and, just other hard things in missionary service as well, I really had a content life, fulfilled life. And after that seemed to have all been taken away. And, in my darker days, I tended to, I guess in a way, fantasize and want to go back to those days.
sure.
And sometimes I'd even, in those early years after the loss of Bethany, I'd go to sleep and imagine that all my kids were alive and well and safe in their beds, and I'd go to sleep. But then, of
Yeah,
course, I'd wake up with
right.
the horror of that wasn't the case. I was living in a bit of a fantasy world. I guess it was a coping mechanism,
Sure.
but trouble going back to look at photos, and sometimes I still do of those days because in my mind they seem like the golden years.
Yes, yes,
But Jill, as I read the scriptures and as I feed my hope in Christ, I realize, well, they were like beautiful years and I'm grateful for them. But the best is ahead.
that's right.
We have eternity ahead. It's not, people will sometimes say to me, oh, well, you'll see Bethany again. I'll say, I won't only just see her again. I'm going to have an eternity of adventures with her.
Yes,
it's
that's
it's
right.
this is not the end. This is a time of waiting. That's what we're both, we understand now, don't we, that this is an in-between liminal space where we're waiting and we're called to do things in the wait until we're reunited. And it's not just seeing them again, it is going to be gloriously living with our family, all those who love Jesus. Um, and so, when I'm tempted to go back and think, oh, my glory days are behind me, all the good is behind me, I have to, have a renewed mind and have the mind of Christ in that, as the Bible says, and look forward, press on forward to what is ahead is far more glorious. And his promises are that he's going to transform all these trials into something that will just far outweigh them. They won't seem, they seem big right now, all
Yes.
these losses, but God's promised to redeem them, to take them and transform them into something magnificent. And that's what we have to look forward to.
Amen. The best is yet to come. And we definitely
Yeah,
have that to look forward to. That's so exciting. What have you learned about God and his character through your journey with Beth?
it's a big question because
Yeah,
I know I'm still really learning it.
sure. Yeah. We don't ever
And
arrive, I don't think.
that's right. I think that's why we've got eternity. We're going to
That's
get
right.
to know him forever, aren't we?
Yes.
But I think through an intense time of suffering, it is an opportunity to really. Um, Up till then, I think I'd known God as a friend, as a companion, as someone I knew that had saved me from separation from God. That where my own sin had separated me from God. So I knew him to a certain degree. And I was starting to get to know him, but in this time of extreme sorrow and suffering. I think I said before, that I had to learn to look at the cross of Jesus. And I've got to keep going back there too and just fall in love with him again for what he has done for us. And, that God himself is the grieving parent,
That's right.
that somehow we know him now as in a way that if we hadn't have gone through this, we couldn't have known him. What it felt like for him, to watch his child suffer. So he knows, and even though we have experienced something incredibly similar and others we meet might have gone through, no one really knows us either
Right.
like God knows us. He knows how
Yes.
he made us. He knows what we're feeling intimately and invites us to come and know him more in that intimate way too. So I know him more now as the suffering servant, than I ever did. because of what we've
Absolutely.
been through. And so, therefore, I will know him as the resurrected, glorious, one. I'll get glimpses of that now, but I'll know him in full, one
Yeah.
day. So I think just, yeah, probably the deeper part is, yeah, that he knows me now in the
Mm.
suffering,
Mhm.
that, and I know that he sees. So for instance, last week when that new baby was born and he knew that my heart was rejoicing and at the same time it was breaking. He
Yes.
could see that. And
Sure.
the things that I couldn't really tell anybody else, but he knew. He
Yes.
sees that, So that's what makes me love him more. That he
Yeah.
gets it. He gets it.
Yes. 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 I love that. So you have actually written 2 books. The first one we've already referred to once. That's called Heartbreakingly Beautiful. And it is a beautiful 52-week devotional journey that includes a lot of the details of Bethany's story, along with many, many pictures of her and of your family. It's a very intimate glimpse, actually, into the life of your family throughout that year of Bethany's illness. Would you share just a little bit about the process of writing that book?
Sure. So when Bethany was sick and David was sort of doing the nursing, and I'm wondering, well, what can I do to to help my daughter through this time? So she had lost, half her vision, as I'd said before, and was struggling to be able to write. So I helped her to keep a journal.
Uh-huh.
So she would dictate, to me. She would, ask me to write things, and certain scriptures that people were sending each day we'd record in this journal, and we had a whiteboard as well. We put promises that people were sending, and so we had this amazing journal. And she said to me one day, Mum, a kind of devotional would be good to come out of this one day, wouldn't it? Because I want people to not just read a book about a girl with cancer and then think, oh, that's sad, and put it back on the shelf. I want it to be all about Jesus and what he has taught me, what he's shown us through this time.
Wow.
And so it was the day after she passed. I just went back to day one of the journey because it was, almost a year to the day that she'd been admitted, because she just died just short of her 16th birthday. I went back and, was sort of, yeah, it was very, very healing to do that, because although it was hard, and one way I was tempted to just say, let's put that away and just forget that ever happened. It couldn't. Just couldn't do it,
Right.
because it was so, that grief was consuming. And I just knew, I think the Lord just knew I needed to face it. I needed
Mm.
to face and not just face the hard things, but also be reminded again of all the incredible things he taught Bethany,
Mm.
and that he wanted to teach me as well. And so from that did come the opportunity to publish the lessons that she learnt, through her trial. And it was published in 2012. Unfortunately, there are only really copies left in Australia, so you'll have to come and visit me to come
Ah,
and get one of those copies now. So if you come to Australia, to Melbourne, there's
there we
some
go.
copies still of Heartbreakingly Beautiful, but the copies in the States have all gone now.
Yeah.
But there have been just great testimonies around the world of how Bethany's story has helped others to grieve and go through their cancer journey with hope.
Yeah.
The hope in Christ that we have. And so in, you know, Bethany's big dream in life, Jill. She went to a youth rally just, 6 months or so before she got sick. It's on top of this other one in New Zealand where she gave her life to God's mission. And she came back to me and she said, after this youth rally, she said, all I do really want to do, Mum, is just for Jesus to get the most glory he can out of my life. Just the
Mm.
most, as I said, she
Yeah.
was to the max. So she
Right.
said,
Uh-huh.
he's just got to get a lot of glory out of my life, Mum.
Yes.
Even though she had a lot of other dreams as well. She wanted 6 children, by the way,
Oh my
and she's,
goodness.
and
Wow.
I asked her, how would she cope with that? She said, well, Mum, you'll be living with me. You'll be Alice, like the Brady Bunch.
Oh,
I
there
said,
you
oh,
go.
will I now?
Everybody needs an Alice. Yeah.
That's right. So she had big dreams, wanted to live life fully. she wanted Jesus to get the most glory, and that dream has come true. She has got a legacy. I can talk about a bit later, but that is some of her dreams in life have come true in a different way than what we would ever have imagined.
Mm.
But very grateful that God planted those things in her heart, and He's got a plan still for her life. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I didn't realize that book was not available in the US. You sent me 2 copies. I don't know if you remember that, but I have 2 copies.
Oh, there you
So,
go. Wow.
if somebody is listening who would like to have one of them, I'm not gonna give up both of them, but would like to have one of them, email me at jill@whilewe'rewaiting.org, and I'll put my email address in the show notes, and send me your address. And of course, I only have one. So whoever emails me first, I will send your book to. How about that?
That
Because
sounds
somebody
great.
else needs to have it. We have a library here at the refuge that your book is
Mhm.
in, both of them.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
but I don't need the extra copy, and I would love for someone to have it. So somebody
That's
out
great.
there, email me, and I will send it to you.
It'll save you a trip to Australia. There you go.
Well, that's true. I would really like to come to Australia too. That would be great. Oh, well, now your newest book is called Waiting Well with Jesus. And of course, I love that title because, we're all about waiting well around here at While We're
Mhm.
Waiting. And
Mhm.
it's a 52-week devotional journal. We talk all the time about how we want to live well while we're waiting to see Jesus and our children again. And this book is all about those principles of how we can wait well. So, talk about how you envision someone using this book to help them wait well.
Well, this devotional really came from my own journaling
Yeah,
then, after finishing Heartbreakingly Beautiful,
right.
just that cry to the Lord, just say, well, okay, what am I supposed to do now while I'm waiting?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like, totally, I say, I do believe your promises, Lord. I've got a reunion ahead. But, I was in my 40s when Bethany passed away. The reality was I could live another 50 years on this earth. And I thought it just seemed impossible, impossible. So it was just that sense from the Lord to say, okay, I've taught you how to wait well. You know, it's in my word waiting for you to discover. So that's where I had to turn. So I started to make a list of all the verbs, that I could find. And many of them are similar, of course, but by the time I got to 150 or so, I'm thinking, yes, there's a lot of things you've asked us to do, Lord, while we're waiting. And there's a whole, I've got those down to 52. But I think what helps me with this format that I've written, just one chapter a week, one verb a week to think about, one thing to do, is that, in times when you feel very overwhelmed in your grief, or, again, you want to live well, but there's all lots of advice, and there's so many books and podcasts and even scriptures you can read, and people telling you should be doing this, or, just to actually just rest. And that's one of the verbs, actually,
Yeah.
rest.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
um, but just to think, well, this is one thing I'll concentrate on this week. There's just the
Yeah.
one thing. And you can work through the devotional alphabetically as all the verbs are written, for those who like to just work through it in that way. Or you can open it to any chapter and just say, this week, I think I'm going to look at the chapter called Heal, or the
Yeah.
chapter called Notice, the chapter called Pray, the chapter called Persevere. There's,
Mm.
52, the chapter called Weep.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do this week. I just need to weep.
Yeah.
And every week has a different story too. Now, there's several in there of the loss of a child, but there's stories of all kinds of losses as well, that devastate lives, losses of marriages, and loss
Mhm.
of health, and the loss of children, perhaps not to death, but to different lifestyles and decisions, the prodigal children that we've
Sure.
lost. All sorts of losses, the loss of, having many miscarriages, or not
Yes.
being able to have children at all.
Yes.
Loss of hopes and dreams about children. All those kinds of losses, and more are in there, and they've come from people that I've either met personally, or read biographies about, or read in the scriptures, because I think that was part of the journaling. I needed to find some examples of people who had this kind of loss, who've gone before me, and to see what's the secret? How do you wait well? I met an American family actually, that missionaries in Wycliffe, and they're one of the first couples that really inspired me with this whole idea. They live in Pennsylvania, and
Mm.
they lost the eldest of their 10 children,
Wow. Yeah.
and it was a mix of a tropical disease that had destroyed his brain, and then he went on to take his life through the torment of that.
Mm.
Um, they returned to the mission field with 9 kids, and I thought, that's impossible. That's just,
Mm.
how can you even do that?
Yeah.
And as I met them and just, really got to know them and found them as an inspirational couple, they were 20 years on from my journey, and they were ministering to people, and they were doing things in this world that I wanted to be doing, but it felt impossible for me to
Sure.
be doing at that point. So just looking for those examples of people I felt who had taken their grief to Jesus, had these incredible promises that they were believing, and then were living the abundant life that Jesus promised.
Mm.
It seemed impossible at the time, so I had a lot to learn, and that's what I pressed into, and that's what I hope will be a blessing to people who are just either entering grief or know of somebody who's going through that sort of grief, and you just don't know what to say, don't know how to minister to them. That these stories, these verbs, each chapter has scriptures and quotes and journaling pages and prayer, and just to be able to sit with one particular theme around that verb of the week, as a practical way to begin to heal, you know,
Mhm.
and a journey through devastating loss.
I love the concept of it. I love that it's one verb, one week at a time. So often devotionals are just a one page, and it's a daily one page something that you read and then you just move on from. But this book is you get that verb and you just focus on that one verb for a whole
Mm,
week.
mhm.
And it just really, you really have time to just soak it in and make application to your life. And I think that's really helpful. When you're grieving, you need time. You need to just
Yes.
soak in something. You can't just flip a page and move on to the next thing in one day, I think. So I find it very helpful.
Yeah, I hope so. And it took me 10 years of journaling to learn these
Yeah.
things. And so I just hope that the Lord will use this to sort of just be a companion and a guide for
Yeah.
those who are perhaps even starting their journey, or a little bit into the journey and feel a bit stuck in their grief, and can feel, this can be a way not out of it, but a companion through it,
Exactly.
and the
Yeah.
whole concept is that we're doing this grief with Jesus. How can
Mm.
we, he is with us, but how can we do it with him? That's an intentional thing, to actually press into God's presence in our grief,
Yeah.
and to know him more in our grief. I think, Jill, that Christians, can be the healthiest grievers on the planet. I think there's two extremes we can go to in our grief. One is that we can ignore it, try and cover it up, try and with busyness, with causes, with all manner of things to try and dull the pain. All sorts. Addictions form, and that form of grief is unhealthy because it's just delaying, work that has to be done in us, and the things that God wants to do to heal us. The other extreme is that we idolize our grief, and that our grief and our loss becomes our whole identity, and it becomes everything we think about, everything we do, and other important areas of our life end up being not addressed, and other people in our lives end up getting hurt because of that. So there's this beautiful place in the middle where um, we can actually grieve with Jesus because we have hope. We don't have to be afraid of grief.
Mhm.
I think that's, one of the underlying themes, in this devotional, to take away the fear of going through it.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for that. All right, so you've got those 52 different verbs. Do you have a favorite one? A favorite one of the verbs that you've built a week-long devotional about?
I think at different seasons and different weeks there's favourites because, I'm
Sure.
going through it now myself with, trying to have fresh eyes as
Yeah.
well, and knowing that these are lifelong lessons, they're not things I've mastered. But one right now is the chapter called Entrust, and
Mm,
I'm reading that through, even with the sense of just entrusting this new resource to God and how He wants to use it in other people's lives. And that is my heart's desire, that He would be able to minister through this resource now to others. And the story in Entrust is actually a story about a prodigal, at one of our friends, dear friends, pastors, missionaries, whose son has chosen a lifestyle that means he's estranged from them, and
yeah.
the heartbreak is so, it's a rejection, not just
Mm,
a loss through death, and yet their attitude is, something I'm trying to learn from too, in just the way that they continue to entrust their son and his life into God's hands, and just this sense of, when we're holding on to our pain and in holding on to all our troubles, God has a better way, and that is to open our hands and to be able to give Him our sorrows, give Him the pain, give Him the uncertainties, give Him the scarred places, the sacred things that we hold dear, but to entrust them. And I talk about that, how I've needed to entrust Bethany's life into His hands,
mm.
knowing that His hands holding her are better than mine,
Yes.
and that kind of thing. So that's what I'm sitting with right now,
Mm,
that whole concept of giving over and trusting, my life and my dreams, my precious things and my losses and all my failures, everything, entrusting everything
yeah.
into the hands of the one who loves us. Yeah,
Yeah. That's good for anyone, whether they've lost a child or
absolutely.
not. I can think of many things that I need to entrust
Yeah.
with
Mm,
him that
mm-hmm.
aren't even related to child loss. At the time this interview airs or this episode, it's going to be probably late November and about the time of the year that people are starting to think about, well, I need a new devotional for next year. So this
Yeah.
is probably good timing for this episode to come out because,
Mm,
you know, I I can't recommend it enough. I think it's amazing. I love the concept, like I said, of having a full week to just soak in all of these different verbs that are so helpful on not just on the journey of child loss, but just in the journey of life, the journey of a Christian
yes.
life.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks,
So
Jill.
I appreciate you writing it.
Mm.
You also have a ministry called Be Blessings. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, as I said before, Bethany had lots of hopes and dreams,
Yeah.
to go and bless the world. She'd heard about a situation in Africa where young women, particularly, having babies and not ready to have babies, and birth injuries
Yeah.
happen after long labour,
Sure.
and they develop a condition called obstetric fistula, which I'd never heard of because, in a developed country, if we had prolonged labour and then a fissure was caused in the birth canal, we would have that attended to immediately. But
Sure.
these women became known as the smelly women, the
Mm.
outcasts in the society. They were incontinent, and in many places there was no education about why it happened, and instead they were despised as unfaithful, bad women who something bad has happened to, and
Wow.
so very, very misunderstood. And when Bethany heard about this situation, she wanted to do something about it. So she'd started fundraising in her life. Before she passed away, she'd raised a couple of $1,000s to help these women, which we thought was pretty remarkable anyway.
Yes.
But one day when I was driving home from the hospital, I heard on our Christian radio station about a ministry, Christian Blind Mission, that is around the world. CBM, Australia, they particularly deal also with this fistula issue. So we have formed a partnership with them, And the Be Blessings Ministry, B is for Bethany, but that whole play on the word of that, that's what we're called, to be blessings in the world. That's what Bethany wanted to do. And somehow, being involved with this has helped with healing as well. I was careful early on, thinking that this could consume my life. Like I said, that temptation to just make myself busy, not to think about the grief, and to try and
Sure.
find some purpose, something in what's happened. And realizing early on I had other children to care for and raise, and other responsibilities in life. So I set aside a day a week to be putting into Bethany's legacy. And God has opened up this Be Blessings ministry to be able to. We've raised about $250,000 now to help these women, and we've
Wow.
been able to go across to Africa and meet some of them who've received operations to have their life restored after some of them had been living as outcasts like this for 10 years or more,
Wow.
and had received a simple operation that restores their life. I've been able to be involved with making a documentary for Miracles Day, which is about restoring sight through cataract surgery as well, because Bethany was in a wheelchair and had lost half her vision. And this ministry seems to have come alongside us, and we've been able to work together to make a difference to some of the people's lives that Bethany wanted to, and probably many more lives, Jill, than she could have actually done in
Right.
person.
Right.
So another sort of mysterious plan of God, that He has taken her life and it's multiplied in a way that we couldn't have if she hadn't have passed away. So the Be Blessings Ministry, it's there on the website, www.be, so be-blessings.com. If you could put those in the show notes, I
I
guess,
will.
Jill. But
Yes.
that just gives a bit more of a background of Bethany's life and her legacy, and some resources there for bereaved people as well. Just yeah. So there's that side of her life that I've been involved with, and been able to speak around the world and do some documentaries and things like that. So life's opened up in a different way for me in that
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
and it's become part of my passion, part of my
Sure.
ministry now as well.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And how could people get a copy of the devotional Wait Well with
Sure.
Jesus?
Yes, waiting well with Jesus.
Yes.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
that journey through heartbreak to hope. Look, the best way for your listeners in the United States is to ask at your local Christian bookstore.
Okay.
They might be able to order it for you, but you can get it directly through Amazon as well. And there's an ebook, a Kindle version as well. Although the book is a devotional, and you ideally want to be able to write in it and have a hard copy.
Right. Right.
Um, at half price, around about half price, is an ebook that you could also just get immediately. So,
Right.
so there's a couple of ways there that
Yeah.
your listeners could get that resource.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, you definitely want a hard copy. I'm just going to tell you
Yeah.
that because you're going to want to be able to write in it. Yeah.
It's published in the United Kingdom,
Okay.
and the more orders we have in the States, the more you'll be able to get it there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I like your suggestion to ask at your local Christian bookstore because we definitely want to give them our business.
Yes, and the more orders that they receive, then the more that we'll get it to be able to share
Yeah.
in the USA.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. So, one last question I always like to ask. Has music been an important part of your grief journey? And if so, what is on your playlist?
Well, our family are pretty musical, and
Yeah.
we love music. And, we all love listening to music. So, I'd mentioned before about Sons of Korah,
Yes.
Australian band that do all the psalms. That's all I could listen to for a while when things were really dark.
Mm,
So I've got a new worship song, new song every week, Jill. But at the moment, I think one I could mention is that's been special this year has been Jen Johnson's "The Goodness of God,"
oh,
and
yeah.
I
Hmm.
think that one, all my life you have been faithful, all my
Yes.
life you've been so good, and I don't say that lightly, because there's times when it didn't seem He was so good,
Right.
but the goodness of God is our hope.
Amen.
and the fact that he is good is the way that is why I'm still alive today and able to speak to you, able to still have a ministry, still be able to have a marriage,
Yeah,
because that's another story that couples are put under a lot of stress
sure.
when after the loss of a child, but for when we've both been able to turn to God in our pain, been able to strengthen our marriage, and all that's come against it to try and tear it apart.
Sure.
He's helped us there. Um, he has been good, and we love him. And I hope that just sharing this today, 13 years on in our journey, will help some of those that you're ministering to in your
Mm.
ministry, Jill, to have hope that there is a future for them and their family after the loss of a child.
Amen. I think that is a good place to close right there. Thank you so much, Lynn. I have enjoyed visiting with you today.
Thank you, and come and visit me in person then one day. I
All
think the
right.
kangaroos are calling, and
Well, that's I
we'd
have
love to
two.
host you guys one day.
Yes, I have two while we're waiting friends in Australia. So
Yeah,
I need to make a trip over there.
I think
We
so.
need to work
That's
that out.
important.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jill. God bless you.
You too. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. If this podcast has been a blessing to you, please take just a moment to leave a rating or a review, and please feel free to share it with someone you know who might be helped by it. We're so grateful for all of you who come back and listen every week, and those of you who may be listening for the very first time. I hope God has used it to encourage you today and to help you live well while you're waiting.